Hey, and now it's time for VenuCenter. I originally was not going to include VenuCenter in this playlist since it's not as strong in base set only. It never really got all that strong, even in base Fossil or base Rocket. But I had several people asking for it, so here it is. VenuCenter's Energy Trans Pokemon power lets you move around grass energy as much as you like on your own turn. It's not energy acceleration, but you can move them back and forth between your Pokemon as much as you like. This gives you the opportunity to move all of the grass energy off of a Pokemon, and then use Pokemon Center to completely heal that Pokemon with no consequences, because you've moved all the energy off, there's nothing to discard, and once the Pokemon's healed, you just move all of the energy right back onto it. And for Venusaur, that's pretty nifty, as it lets you get off more solar beams once you get it fully powered up. The problem with Venusaur, though, is that it takes 4 turns minimum to start firing off those 60 damage solar beams, and there's Pokemon in the format that are way more efficient. So why don't we just find a good partner for Venusaur that can utilize Energy Trans as an ability, but can actually be more damage efficient with these energy that we're going to be moving around. The mind automatically goes to other Pokemon that utilize those grass energy, like Nidoking, another stage 2 that requires 3 grass energy. Still not great on the damage efficiency. Or maybe even Beedrill, another stage 2 that does a little more damage for 3 grass energy, and it's got free retreat, resistance to fighting, pretty good. Not so much in playtesting though. In playtesting, I could not find a decent grass partner for Venusaur, including multiple stage 2 lines just was not cutting it. It was still preferable to just attack with Venusaur, even though it did take an extra turn. But Energy Trans doesn't specify that you have to move those grass energy between grass Pokemon, so you do have the opportunity to make a bit of a potpourri deck with Venusaur. The problem is base set doesn't have a whole lot of Pokemon of other types that could utilize those grass energy to get off any good attacks. Except for, of course, colorless cards. And so that's what ended up working the best. So let's get into the deck list and see what this Pokemon lineup ended up being for VenuCenter. Don't worry, there's no Gyarados in this deck. I just really like the color contrast of the orange, blue, and green. We are, of course, starting this deck list with full playset of Bulbasaur. Because of its HP and attack cost, it is not ideal to start the game with a Bulbasaur in the active position. Hopefully you have one on its bench, since early game you're really only going to be evolving it up and building up that turn 4 Solar Beam. For that same reason, it's also not imperative to evolve up into Venusaur as quickly as possible, like you would expect from some other base set decks. So we got 3 Ivysaur, and we're going to top off the evolution chain with 3 Venusaur. There's not really a way to accelerate grass energy, and this deck really doesn't thrive until late game when you do have a lot of energy that you can move back and forth. And so you're really going to take your time, try to manage the game as best as you can for those first 3 to 5 turns, maybe even more than that, because you are going to get hit with energy removal a lot of the time, which is going to slow this deck down a lot. And since the early game is going to be just focused on getting that energy per turn attached to some Pokemon, it doesn't necessarily matter. It's going to be good to have some stall cards in here, so we're going to be running 3 copies of Chansey, the ultimate base set stall card. It's going to be most ideal to start the game with either a Chansey or a Doduo in the active position. We're also running 3 Doduo in here. Doduo is just a great utility card that you can attach a grass energy to. You can get some Fury attacks off. If it seems like it's going to get knocked out within the next turn or so, you can retreat it, and that grass energy is going to stay on there, so it's still going to be available to transfer over to something else once you do get fully evolved up into a Venusaur. Doduo also helps cover Chansey's weakness with Doduo's own resistance, and so they kind of work good together very early game as you're getting your bench set up. And hopefully Doduo might even be a good target for your opponent's energy removals early game. That way you can go ahead and get them out of the way and kind of try to bait them into knocking energy off of Doduo or Chansey. Because a lot of times with this deck, people might sleep on Chansey and think that you are just using it as a stall card, and then late game you move it into the active position, transfer energy over to it, and then hit your opponent for 80. Draw support in this deck is going to be spread between 2 Oaks, 3 Bills, and 2 Maintenance. Each one of those are pretty situational and work pretty well for this deck depending on what your opening hand is, what you top deck on turn 1. A couple copies of Computer Search in here to assist with getting the cards you need in your hand when you need them. It could maybe stand to use a third. Sometimes I was wishing I had a Computer Search in my hand when I was having trouble finding a Chansey early game. But Pokemon Trader, got 3 copies of those. That seems to work pretty well most of the time. To where you're just going, okay, well, I've got a Venusaur in my opening hand, but I'm not going to need it for 2 more turns. So let me go ahead and swap that out for a Doduo or a Chansey, depending on the deck that you're up against. 3 copies of Switch, because Venusaur and Chansey do have retreat costs, and you don't want to be discarding energy needlessly. The point of the deck is to just have grass energy spread all over the field. That way you can move it onto the Pokemon that need it. You know, kind of keep it up in the air what your attacker is going to be, because you're constantly going to be moving energy off of Pokemon to fully heal them and then move energy back onto them. One of the biggest differences between VenuCenter and the other big deck that utilizes Pokemon Center, Damage Swap, is that in Damage Swap you're kind of distributing the damage counters across Pokemon until you're ready to heal, and then you move them all onto a Chansey and heal it up. With VenuCenter, you can't really do that. There's not a way to move damage counters, so you end up healing a lot more often. When you anticipate that your opponent's going to get a knockout next turn, you know you have to heal off the damage off of a Venusaur or a Chansey to protect it. So this VenuCenter build runs 3 copies of Pokemon Center, which is just 1 more than Damage Swap, but it does mean a lot because not only do you have the 3 copies, you're going to be fishing some out and recycling them with Item Finder later in the game. But another key difference from Damage Swap is that you have the ability to move energy with this deck, and so you can move all the energy off of a Chansey, you scoop up, and then play it right back down to the field, so essentially you have 2 means of completely healing Pokemon. And when you scoop your active Pokemon, you get to move something from the bench into the active position, so that's almost a free switch and heal in itself. This deck's also running 2 copies of Blast to help battle against energy removals. Just like every other deck, you want to try to keep them out of your opponent's hand and get them shuffled back into the deck. 2 copies of Gust, which you're more often than not going to be using as another stall tactic rather than getting cheap kills like Gust usually does. Couple copies of Energy Retrieval, so that when grass energy gets sent to the discard, you can get it back into your hand so that it can see play again. Again, the point of this deck is to build up energy all over the place. That way you can move it where you need it, attack with whatever you want to, whenever you want to. And if you don't have the energy in play to do it, then the deck kind of falls flat. The way gameplay with this deck mostly looks is you just spend the entire first 4 or 5 turns of the game just trying to stay alive, try to get as much energy on the field as you can, try to keep it on the field, and then hopefully you're able to turn it around late game and hit with a lot of surprise big old damage. I did play around with Farfetch a little bit in VenuCenter 2 to see if it would work as kind of an early game threat to maybe just deal as much early damage as possible, and then later in the game try to clean up with Chansey and Venusaur, but I really just wasn't pleased with the outcome, and I really just preferred having more Doduo or more Chansey in the deck. I also tested a VenuCenter Damage Swap hybrid, but the deck ultimately wasn't focused enough to actually be good, so regular VenuCenter and Damage Swap were both better than the hybrid turned out to be. If you want the deck to be faster, you can run it with Electrode. You really have to rethink your Pokemon lineup, but you know, at the end of the day, Electrode can be moved around with Energy Trends as long as it's a grass energy. Energy Trends does not specify that they have to be basic grass energy. So if you are determined to use this big fat plant toad, there are options. There's ways to have fun with it. Just don't expect it to be hyper competitive. So I think that I have thoroughly milked the base set only custom format. If you disagree, let me know. Let me know what decks you want to see. I've gotten requests for stuff like base set Raichu, base set Dugtrio, and yeah, you can build decks around those, but do you really want to? Do you really want entire videos dedicated to those? There have also been several commenters that don't believe me about the notorious Bradford pear tree, so if you have experience with these smelly trees, leave me some support down in the comments as well. As always, thanks for watching. Social media links are down in the description. I'll see you guys next video. Bye.